All right, good morning. We'll go ahead and get started on time at 10 a.m. I'm sure some people will continue to log in. And again, please stay muted and keep your video off to kind of save bandwidth and everything. You can unmute when I pause for questions, but for any questions, it's preferred that you type them in the chat box so that everybody can see them. And this is being recorded. It will be posted on the DCR website afterwards for you to review or share with your colleagues. My name is Crystal McKelvey, and I'm the Recreation Grants Manager within the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, Division of Planning and Recreation Resources. Kelly Seaton is also on the line and is in the Division of PRR, and she's the Recreation Grants Coordinator. I'm going to turn off my webcam. All right. So we're excited to offer this grant round. Today we're going to go over the program as general. Talk about project eligibility, the application process, how the applications will be evaluated, general grant management for those selected projects, and we will have Q&A between each section. The Land and Water Conservation Fund is a federal, state, and local partnership that began in 1965. There are several LWCF programs, but this is the state assistance program specifically. The purpose of this is to provide matching grants to states and local governments for the acquisition and development of public outdoor recreation areas and facilities. This funding comes through the Department of Interior through the National Park Service, and it is overseen by the LWCF Act. These grants are provided, like I said, to states and then through the state to subrecipients. This is a matching reimbursement program and can provide up to 50% reimbursement for the project. Any property that is funded with LWCF must be protected in perpetuity for the purpose of specifically outdoor recreation. In Virginia, we have 388 sites already, and many of these sites have come back for multiple grants, and so we've administered over 500 separate grants for LWCF thus far. And the overseeing document for this is the Virginia Outdoors Plan, which is the State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan for Virginia. And the current one is 2018, and we are working and gearing up for the 2023 BOP, but please reference the 2018 one for the application. For this grant round, we're excited to have $11.64 million in funding available. In prior years, we were offering acquisition, but this year we're excited to offer also development, as well as combination projects that are both acquisition and development, as long as they can be finished within 3 years. The minimum project request this year is for $250,000 of federal funding. Since it's 50-50, that would be a $500,000 minimum total project cost. And the maximum is up to $2 million, dependent upon available funding and load of how many applications we get. So you must be able to have public outdoor recreation opportunities available and completed within 3 years of the grant authorization. This year's schedule is a bit compressed, I admit. This is largely due to a reconfiguring of the National Park Service staff's timelines. So we announced it as soon as we could, February 1st, after modernizing all of the documents. And the applications are due by 4 p.m. on March 15th. We are taking those via email, but we will not be able to accept any late applications. In April, the grant committee will meet to review all of the applications and score them. And then we will make recommendations for funding and contact those applicants to schedule site visits, also hopefully within April. And then you'll have an opportunity to complete additional documentation, but the initial submission to the National Park Service that DCR does on the behalf of the applicants is due April 15th. So that is our compressed schedule constraints. And then in July is the grants.gov submission. So that's the online tool. There's only a 6-week window for submitting those projects to go through the authorization process. Eligible applicants include local governments such as cities, towns, counties, state agencies, tribal governments, and also park authorities. The final landowner must be able to keep the land protected and managed in perpetuity. All applications will be scored equally, whether they're agency or local. And on the application, please be sure to provide the contact of the specific entity lead, not the grant writer per se, but who will be the main project manager to contact. So eligible project types are pretty broad. Thankfully, the National Park Service takes outdoor recreation as a general definition, and there are obviously lots of options within that. It's important for the acquisition grant round to describe all reservations, easements, right-of-ways, and existing facilities or structures. And it's important to note if it is a new park or an expansion, because the National Park Service does require that the entire park be covered with what we call the 6F boundary, which is the bounds that will be protected in perpetuity. For the recreation uses, please describe all that you have proposed. That way we know how much public recreation and different variety of opportunities will be available. And as you can see, this does include a big variety of different things, from playgrounds to ball fields. We have had swimming and splash pads, and it can include support buildings. I'm going to go through some other eligible specific types in a moment. So this is a long list, and sorry for all the words, but in the NPS LWCF manual, there is specific definitions of what these different types of outdoor recreation are. And some of them do have some nuances of specific items that cannot be funded. But for sports and play fields, this is pretty broad. For baseball, softball, tennis courts, playgrounds, golf courses, skate parks, and other similar facilities. Picnic facilities can include the tables, fireplaces, shelters, and other things related to family or group picnic sites. And they can have a basic roof over them, but outdoor focused. And for the trails, these can be the development of land or water-based trails, primarily for outdoor recreation activities that can include nature walks, hiking, bicycling, horseback riding, paddling, and they can connect parks with communities or other parks, or serve as standalone recreation features. It is important that for trail projects, you must be able to identify the bounds of what will then be called the park. This can also include trailheads, overlooks, etc. For swimming facilities, we do provide assistance for swimming beaches, outdoor pools, wading pools, and splash pads, and other similar facilities. Boating facilities does have a couple different nuances there, because there are some different fund options nationally, and those do have to be verified that there's not two different funding sources for it. If you have specific questions about that, please do reach out to me offline. Fishing and hunting facilities can include fishing piers, access points, as well as habitat improvements, and will be eligible only if they will be open to the public for compatible outdoor recreation. The renovation has received a lot of interest, and this is exciting to us as well. However, it must be for facilities or recreation amenities that are past their lifespan, not due to poor maintenance. So do please look at that within Chapter 3 of the LWCF NPS manual. Beautification is also a possibility to make sure that the natural resources are being protected and to allow ease of access to the area. Accessible facilities is definitely important. So if you have amenities that are not currently accessible, you could apply for funding to bring those up to accessibility code. Camping, primitive camping primarily, and you can see there's also interpretive facilities, as long as those are focused on the outdoor recreation resources and natural resources. Spectator facilities, that generally means seating for ball fields and amphitheaters for outdoor events. Support facilities are also eligible under development, and these are facilities that are needed by the public for outdoor recreation use of an area. That can include roads, parking, utilities, restrooms, kiosks, simple shelters, walkways, pavilions, and equipment rental space. It is important that they are primarily outdoors. They can have a simple roof or cover, and it must primarily be for that park specifically. There's a lot of variations, a lot of different parks in Virginia, so it is essential to provide information specific to how it relates to recreation. Operation and maintenance facilities are also an option for funding if they are for the storage and administration of that park. It must directly serve outdoor recreation. I know I say that a lot, but it's essential in the application to make that clear to the National Park Service. There is a list of ineligible projects. So for acquisitions, not eligible include historic sites and structures, semi-professional or pro sports that provide economic gain or will exclude a lot of the time for public use of the area. Non-public game refuges are ineligible, and anything that's mainly for indoor facilities. Also lodges, hotels, motels, restaurants that are indoor for-profit establishments are not eligible. And also agricultural land that will be kept in agriculture primarily or for preservation are not eligible. In the realm of development projects, again, indoor facilities such as meeting rooms, restaurants, lodges, kitchens, equipment sales are not eligible. Professional facilities or exclusive uses, mobile recreation units, indoor displays, or employee housing. I'm going to pause here because eligibility is a pretty broad topic. So let's see if we have anybody in the chat, Kelly. Are there any questions right now?
Yeah, we had one question and a comment in the question box. So would the demolition of an existing blighted structure be eligible that they're then going to, enhance the site after they do that demolition?
Yes, within the NPS manual, demolition is an option if it is needed. So that does sound like an eligible project.
That's all the questions that we had in the question box.
Thank you.
So we got just got one more in. Let me read it here. So you mentioned habitat improvement is eligible if the site is publicly accessible. Is invasive species management planning and control management activities eligible?
I would have to know a little bit more about if they're asking about the plan being funded, but for beautification and removal of invasive species generally to improve the outdoor access, that would be eligible.
And then another question is that they work at a resort. If an area is open to the public, would it be eligible?
Typically resorts, I would believe, may be privately owned. So anything privately owned is not eligible. Resorts, I may ask that person to submit their email address or submit that question via recreationgrants@dcr.virginia.gov. If you can drop that email, Kelly, to talk a little bit more about what that resort includes. But typically like ski resorts and things that do have areas that are open to the public are not eligible.
And then we may need more follow-up information from this person. The question is, are political subdivisions eligible?
If that political subdivision is a PDC or has authority to maintain the property in perpetuity and not fold, and lose the property, then that is likely an eligible candidate, but please do email the specifics to us. We'll get back to you with that.
All right, and one more question here. Could you include several sites as one project?
That's a great question. Yes, you can, as long as all those sites are managed by the same entity and willing to put the entire park of all of those sites under 6F protection.
All right, one more here. Is any of the funding money from a federal source?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Is any of the funding money from a federal source?
It's directly from the Department of Interior National Park Service, and also I'll get into funding in a moment, but it cannot be matched typically with other federal funds.
All right, that's all the questions that are in at this time.
Okay. Later in the presentation, we can pause and let people unmute, but I want to move forward here and talk about the funding basics. Payments will be made on a reimbursement basis, so it's important to be able to fund the project fully up front, then provide proof of that payment of the agreed amount to then get the reimbursement. Again, this is a match reimbursement, so the requirement for the match is at least 50% of the project cost, and the federal funds cannot be used as match, like I just said, including a lot of the recovery funds that have been coming out. Those cannot be used as match to LWCF projects. There is an option to include donation values, and those must be presented and estimated up front, and those could be included for the match. For the funding of acquisitions, please note that no purchases or transfers of the property can be made prior to the grant agreement release. Only the cost of the acquisition purchase is eligible. Other costs such as surveys and appraisals are not reimbursable. And the funding for the acquisition will be based on the appraised and reviewed value. So the appraisals must be to the Uniform Appraisal Standards for Federal Land Acquisitions, or UASFLA Yellow Book. And that means that the appraiser must be certified to that level, and it also has to be reviewed by a separate certified appraiser. The final appraisal must have a date within 1 year of when NPS receives that. If it's older than that, you will need to redo the appraisal, have an update. For the funding of development, it must be able to be proven that the funding is for the accessibility and protection of the recreation resources, and all development projects must be designed in conformance with ABA and ADA accessibility standards. This can include the construction and renovation of areas, site planning, engineering and architectural services, as well as the final contractor materials labor costs. It is pretty broad, but I do recommend that you read the specifics within the NPS LWCF manual or reach out for more information for your specific situation. Items of note, again, is that the entire park, including any existing property, must be SIXF protected upon funding. If you have a current park that's not SIXF protected per se, and you're going to add some adjacent property, then both of those parcels will need to be protected. Public recreation must be able to be available within 3 years of the acquisition or at the completion of construction for development projects. Please be very clear about the park boundary, the existing acreage, and all conditions on site. So the big question here is your proposed project ready for LWCF funding? The projects need to be beyond the conceptual point, must have some public support, and a very clear scope of work. Sometimes there are parks that have a lot of different construction items going on at the same time, perhaps some indoor facilities, etc., and that's okay as long as what you are applying for is very clearly the outdoor recreation resources. Obviously, a lot of us have multiple phases projects, so please do consider at what phase you can successfully complete within 3 years and fits the eligibility requirements of this program. Also, since this is federal funds, all projects must go through the NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act, and the NHPA, National Historic Preservation Act, or Section 106 process. I'll get more into that a little bit here with the application documents, but it is essential to have that prior to NPS authorization. So at this time of application, you can begin that coordination with different agencies, submit what you have, and then continue that coordination in the hopes of completing it by the NPS submission come July or earlier. Projects that are not shovel ready may be recommended for the next grants.gov opportunity. Typically each year NPS opens that database for project submissions at least twice. So right now we don't know what the second window will be, but we are going to prioritize those ready eligible projects that have a lot of that coordination done first. So I'm going to pause there again for any kind of programmatic questions before I jump into the application items. Have there been any questions in the chat?
Yeah, there's a few things that have come in, so we'll be jumping around a little bit back to what you were previously talking about. So one question is, about kind of combination projects. Would it be too much to submit a plan that includes both replacing a playground and constructing a small hiking trail?
Not necessarily. Again, with the project minimum cost being $250,000, well, total 500,000. I do suspect that many of the projects will have multiple components. If the acquisition can be completed pretty smoothly, say within the first year, and get through the permitting process and bidding process to do construction, then that does sound likely to be eligible and also successful if there are staff on hand to keep the project moving forward, pretty smoothly.
All right, thank you. Next one was that, can this be matched with general funds?
If that means state general funds and local general funds, yes, as long as it's not a federal source.
All right, next question is, in-kind labor eligible for matching purposes? And if so, how do they determine the value?
That's a great question. In-kind labor is an option for match. It does have to be documented. If it's volunteers, then you can use the state volunteer hourly rate and must have time logs and documentation of that. For in-house labor, it is best to provide what the actual cost of those individuals are, and likely would need to include timesheets, proof of payment of that, etc., to put a real dollar amount on it for match. So at the time of application, you can make your best estimate possible. And then if the project is authorized, we can talk about the specific documentation then needed. We do encourage people to consider donations to better leverage the funding. We know that funding can be a difficult matter. So please do think about if you do have any donation options or in-kind options.
All right, next question. How do you demonstrate document public support?
Typically, one of the ways is that it's been presented to a board of supervisors or council. And then also, I know that during COVID, it's been difficult to have like public, meetings, large groups. But if you've done possibly a survey, or if you have information in your plan that this like comprehensive recreation plan, that this has been put to public review, that could also suffice. However, to officially go through the NEPA process before authorization, it will need to go to a 30-day public comment release that describes the scope of work and provides the opportunity for people to email or respond to any comments that they have about the project. And then we'd have to see that that was posted, i.e. like a PDF of the newspaper print or the website print, and then a summary of any comments received.
All right, and this I know you're going to go into in a little bit. What criteria are the projects scored on?
I will get into that in a minute. So if you can hold off and see if you have any questions after that, we'll revisit it.
Okay, there's still a couple more questions in here. So if a project has currently been submitted for another federal grant, but the awards have not been announced yet, can the project apply for LWCF? And if that other fund source comes through, they'll notify DCR.
It does depend upon the timing of that, because we bookmark, a certain amount of money for each project. And then if it's withdrawn, that does put a risk to our funding. So if that person would be willing to email, again, some specifics about that, I can answer it more directly.
All right, and then the last question we have in right now is asking you to describe more about you stating that there may be an opportunity for funding later in the year.
Right, so each year Virginia receives an apportionment determined by the National Park Service. The Great American Outdoors Act has really pushed the funding even higher. For example, last year Virginia received $6.4 million in LWCF funding apportionment, but we only have up to 3 years to then obligate that money to projects. So this year is a combination of the prior 2 apportionments. We have to at least authorize the older money, which is approximately $4.5 million, and then we can start hitting the newer money. So we do have time to use those funds if there's projects that need a little bit more time to do their NEPA and other coordination, because NPS will not authorize it without that. So what I'm saying is that we're willing to work with people depending on their project readiness, but we just do have to prioritize those that are eligible, rank high, and are shovel ready.
All right, and then a follow-up question by another attendee. Will the next round include development?
We do plan to. We would like to have annual grant rounds, and as long as the funding is consistently pretty substantial, it is my goal and DCR's goal to continue the development option. Yes.
And then can you clarify whether the NEPA and NHPA efforts must be submitted for review or actually approved prior to the NPS submission?
The National Park Service has relayed to me that it must be submitted, and then they are the authority that approves that, and it may take time for their team to officially authorize and do the final determination, but they need it on hand to be able to do that. And they don't want to release conditional agreements, i.e., finish your NEPA at time of authorization. So they will streamline that as much as possible. But yes, it must be complete before project authorization. So
all right, those are all the questions we had right now.
All right, thank you so much. At this time, I'm going to jump into the application items. There are multiple forms, but the application helps the scoring committee review the entire project, helps us determine the project readiness and eligibility, then present this information directly to the National Park Service, evaluate the funding request, and determine all the details. So let's take a look. I'm going to stop this slideshow and actually pull up the documents. It's important to go straight to the DCR LWCF website and download all of them, including the application manual. The manual is very helpful because it really does provide a step-by-step guidance for the different parts of these documents. There's an appendix that is very helpful. The required documents for all applicants include the DCR application form, budget, A&R form, timeline, and 3 different maps. Then there are also required documents depending on what type of project you're proposing, whether development or acquisition. And there are not templates for that, but you will need to provide those and name the file with the given nomenclature. Also, you can provide optional documents such as project photos, letters of support, but here with the required documents, it's very important to check this and do submit them. Even though there's not a template, please do first review this application checklist document. And from there, the DCR application is the next one that I would recommend you look through. And this corresponds with the scoring criteria and provides all of the details that we'll need for tracking and reporting of the project. It's important to include the direct contact that we can call to schedule site visits and ask additional questions. And it is a Word document. As you type, it will move the table further down. So if you have any issues with using the Word documents, please do reach out again to that email address and we'll provide prompt assistance as best we can. But this does cover all of the different things that we need to evaluate the project need and details for the project scope. Do be mindful to be very comprehensive and give us a really good idea of what the project is, but be mindful to not make too much of a huge essay in the different boxes. So we've provided examples for what we're looking for different sections. And though it does look pretty detailed, the questions will really help us a lot with the scoring. And then for the certification, this should be signed by a person that does have the authority to move this forward, both to verify that the funding is available and that there is local support and staffing available for this. So again, all of this must be submitted by 4 p.m. on March 15th. The next one is the project budget. We have provided an example about how to fill this out, and really it's very specific to what different elements your project is proposing. So provide as many details as you can, and do answer all of these questions on the first page. It's important to identify what your funding sources are to make sure they are eligible, and to make sure that you really do have the capability to fund upfront and provide the match. You can add lines on this by inserting rows if needed, and you may not answer all of these. You may just say NA for them, but we tried to be comprehensive for the different elements. If you also want to attach, a proof of your funding or any other estimates that you have, please do so as well. The third document is actually from the National Park Service, and is a document that will have to be submitted to them directly. And so to make that process smoother, we do request this year that you, the applicant, fill these out, because it is the questions that the National Park Service will need before authorization. It's been simplified. There is a federal form for this, but I've simplified it for the purposes of this application procedure. Some of these will be related to the scoring criteria, but overall, these are to provide the details for eligibility and project scope. There are certain sections that are based on just acquisition or just development, so do be mindful to answer the sections that are pertinent to your project type. And then what I really want to focus on for this one, pardon my scrolling, is this Environmental Resources Survey, section C. There are a description here of what is required, and I do realize that certain projects may not have already gone through the NEPA process. So these tables are to be completed with your best information available. And then prior to project authorization, we will need to have all the corresponding proof of that agency communication and research. If you do have questions about these, I recommend that first you go to our website and look at the environmental review procedures. We have written up how to walk through the public comment, how to begin the agency correspondence with all of the entities required. Again, that's available directly on the DCR LWCF website. Many of the corresponding procedures can be done with local staff, so do look at that and get that process started earlier than later. So again, just answer both tables need to be completed to your best ability. If I have any questions after the project review, I will get back to you and try to work with you as much as possible on this process. And then the project timeline. It's essential to be able to view that the project will be completed within the 3-year timeline. We have put the different important dates to remember about our process and the National Park Service authorization, which is projected to be October of 22. It does take time for them to review and approve everything. It could be as late as January 2023. So do be mindful of that. It's important to be able to be patient in this process and then ready to launch upon authorization. So we allow space here to insert your timeline, but do make sure that you include at least these specific milestones for all projects, when it will be open, how long it will take to finish the review process, and then we have specifics for acquisition and development. Please be as detailed as you can so that we know you're considering all the different parts of the project timeline, as well as so that we know that the different parts are eligible for reimbursement. And that will be directly submitted to the National Park Service as well. So from there, you are again able to submit photos and go back to that checklist to make sure everything has been included. It's essential to know also that there are 3 maps that are needed for the application. A specific location map, looking at the general area, what's nearby, and where it will be corresponding to those different amenities within the community. then the specific boundary area map, and then the site development plan or the conceptual plan. There are more details specifically about what needs to be included in these in the DCR LWCF manual. I'm going to switch back over to my PowerPoint real quick. Let's see. And of course I went to the wrong slide. Excuse me. Are there any questions right now, Kelly, in the chat box?
Yeah, there's a couple. So one is, can VLCF, Virginia Land Conservation Foundation, or VOF funds be used as match?
That's a great question. I was going to cover that a little bit later, but yes, VLCF, the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation, is able to be stacked since it is state-sourced funding. You can apply for both for acquisition. The VLCF is not really related to development. So the project does have to align and be accepted by both projects, by both programs for that to then be stacked. So it is possible, but there are certain criteria that need to align. And then the Virginia Outdoors Fund, I would need to know a little bit more about the specifics because it can get tricky when we're talking about easements, and then the restrictions of those easements in combination with the in perpetuity requirement for public outdoor recreation can be very specific to the project site. If they want more information, again, they can email us and I can look into that more specifically.
Okay, and then there's a question. So if a city already owns a parkland parcel and they want to purchase an adjacent parcel, can they use that first parcel and put it under LWCF protection as their match? So they do already own the parcel, but is not LWCF protected.
Unfortunately, since that is already owned and for the purposes of outdoor recreation, it cannot be used as match. If there is a transfer or gift of property that was not already under the ownership of that entity, it could possibly be used as match depending upon, the different, again, I hate to say it, but everything kind of has its own little details that have to be looked at very carefully to make sure they align with the National Park Service requirements. I do recommend that applicants look at that National Park Service manual. You can word search, you can go to certain sections, especially Chapter 3 will answer a lot of those questions. So please do review that as well, because your answer may be quickly found there.
All right, and then the next question is about the eligibility of funds for matching. So if the project were to be approved and then they secure a new funding source for their match, is that possible to be approved, and what would the process be for that?
There can be changes. It would need to be definitely brought to the attention of us at DCR. And then if there were, any questions, it would be taken to National Park Service for their approval via email. But if it requires an amendment, such as the project is more expensive than they planned, or a significant change to the project scope, that would need to be, processed as an amendment, which does take time and is the final authority of the National Park Service.
All right, next question. Can LWCF awards be used for A&E services for recreation infrastructure, such as bridges, if the implementation and construction of those bridges is included in the whole project scope and 3-year time frame?
Engineering and architectural services are eligible as long as everything can be completed within that 3-year project time period and that the scope and design goes fully through the NEPA process. That sounds like it should be eligible. Yes.
Okay. And then is grant administration eligible as in-kind match?
Typically under LWCF, I have to admit, we have not done development for a long time. So there are a lot of things that I am researching and learning along the way. But if all of the documentation can be provided that work is specific to this LWCF project, which honestly takes a lot of documentation, timesheets, etc., it could be eligible, but it would be the authority of the National Park Service to determine that ultimately. I would recommend that they include that in their application, but do understand that the final authority is the National Park Service, not DCR.
Okay, and then would a park owned by county local government upgrading playground equipment there be eligible?
Upgrading playground equipment, as long as the park is 6F and protected, if it's being brought up to modern standards and accessibility standards, that should be eligible, yes.
That's all the questions that are in right now.
Great, thank you. So again, please do download directly from the DCR LWCF website all of these different documents at once and make sure that you're not missing any of the required parts. It can be submitted all as a zip folder, or you can combine the documents into a PDF for submission as well. So these are, again, the important ones that I just went through. And the deadline, reiterating, 4 p.m. Tuesday, March 15th. Cannot be late. We will not be able to review those, and they are to be submitted via this email address, recreationgrants@dcr.virginia.gov. We covered a lot of those. So I do want to talk a minute about the scoring criteria. This is also available there. We've worked hard to make sure that all documents and information is available. And this is a balance of both the National Park Service Department of Interior requirements for the program, as well as priorities within Virginia. The general parts of this include project readiness, Virginia Outdoors Plan and Conserve Virginia, outdoor recreation access for all, including equity, accessibility, and need, the local need and local support, and then the budget grant match, as well as the application completion. Then all of this will go to the committee. They will be the ones scoring. There will be multiple people scoring and then averaging that, meeting and going through to rank them for selection based on those. I will say that there are discretionary points available as well for the committee. Those members include DCR staff and other state agency partners. One part that is new this year that is on the scoring criteria and is a question on the application is about the recreation need models. Natural Heritage DCR created a new recreation access model that we welcome you to look at. There are different sections for land-based versus water-based. And if the DCR recreation access model does not provide a good view of your site based on if it's city or local, there are different parts of it that are not covered. You can also go to the Trust for Public Land Park Serve. Further, if there's very low or no need identified in any of these models, you can provide supporting evidence for points. This is a screenshot, and I do ask you to go to the application manual to have a walkthrough of how to use those different databases and answer those questions on the application. So the next steps, once we submit, get all of the applications in and organized, the committee will then receive those, review them, make recommendations, provide their scoring. We'll meet and then discuss those and immediately, pretty quickly, reach out to the applicants to start that correspondence, check in about what is still required, schedule a site visit. I do have to submit a form to National Park Service about site visit to verify that the site can include those kind of proposed ideas, take some pictures, and meet with the staff that will be carrying the grant forward. You then have some time to complete the final requirements before the submission to the National Park Service. They do their review process and then authorize, hopefully before the end of the federal fiscal year, which is in September. Once NPS authorizes the project, it can officially begin. It's important to not start construction, not purchase the property until official authorization has been provided. All NPS LWCF projects have a 3-year project period. It is difficult to get approval for extensions unless there's clear documented evidence of why the project was not able to succeed within 3 years, and it has to be approved pretty far ahead. If you suspect that the project will not be on track, please do have open communication with us so that we can communicate with the National Park Service. Again, it's very important that we can provide all of the NEPA and NHPA documentation before ground disturbance, before drawdown of funding, and at this point this year, before project authorization. The National Park Service will do the tribal consult with the federal tribes that have purview and view over the different areas where the projects are. And the National Park Service will come back if they need further clarification, and I will coordinate that with the said applicant and then continue that communication with National Park Service until they're satisfied. So ultimately, DCR is the advocate and the grantee. All of it is submitted to the National Park Service. They oversee it. DCR receives the authorization on the behalf of the sponsor. So the project applicant is basically the sub-recipient. All correspondence to National Park Service does go through DCR. At the time of successful project closeout, there will be another site inspection by DCR staff. You must post an acknowledgement sign that identifies the project was funded with LWCF. A final deed will need to be submitted, and in that deed must be the language, which is in our DCR manual, specifying that the entire property is protected, and if there is to be a conversion, i.e. any property removed from public outdoor recreation use, there's a process for replacing that and going through a procedure with the National Park Service. So that language must be included in the final deed, that it's protected in perpetuity. A final map that is accurate for the boundary will need to be submitted, and also that needs to be signed by the local staff. And proof of payment for the construction side of things, that would be the invoices, proof of check being cleared or direct deposit of that. And depending on the variety of elements you have in your project, like I said earlier, if there's admin, there needs to be documentation to prove that value. And then upon receiving all of these documents, it'll be sent to NPS for their closeout approval. Upon that, the funds will then be transferred. Now for development, there are going to be different stages. You can submit for reimbursement through the project, but for acquisition, it's a one-time final project scenario. So there are options to receive funding for development as the project proceeds. All right, in general, the LWCF applications will help us determine project eligibility, and from there we will consider all of them. Please present what you have. Be honest about the different components and any elements that are still being designed, and we will work with you from there. The National Park Service, though, has the final authority, and DCR is your advocate. I would also recommend that you be patient and advise any partners and colleagues that it can take time to get authorized. The National Park Service does have quite a lot to process, and most of the staff cover multiple states, but thankfully we have good coordination with them, and we're hopeful for a successful and efficient grant round this year. LWCF is an effective way to protect your parkland, develop access for all, and invest in our public resources. We do know, that during the times of COVID, despite all the negative impacts, it's really proven that recreation is important in our communities, and we need to continue to invest in that and have worthwhile opportunities for all. Just to tell you about some other DCR grant opportunities, within the LandCon office at DCR is the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation. These are state funds for the protection of open spaces and parklands, which is the one that can stack with LWCF, lands of historic or cultural significance, farmlands and forests, and natural areas. So there's different categories. Please do look at their website, and Suzanne Bolbakaya is the contact for that, which is available on that website. And within PRR, again, we do recreation grants. For LWCF, we have yet to hear what the 2022 apportionment is. That's still being calculated in headquarters. And the goal is to have annual grant rounds. We worked hard to modernize these documents to include the development and to come up to the standard of the newly released March 21 NPS manual. So we hope to continue to move forward annually. And we also manage the Recreational Trails Program, RTP, which is Federal Highways Administration funding. It's an 80-20 match reimbursement specific for different categories of trail construction. It can also cover the preliminary engineering. And we are working towards the 2022 grant round pending for the spring. We are awaiting the final numbers for the apportionment for this year before we launch that grant round. So here's my contact information. Again, Crystal McKelvey, and this is my direct work line. And I would prefer that you primarily email recreationgrants@dcr.virginia.gov because that's monitored by a couple of us and we can respond pretty quickly. You can also reach out to me directly. I really thank you for your interest. The webinar will be posted for you to review, go through, or share with your colleagues. And I thank you for your time. And you can stay on the line. First, we'll go through the chat questions, and then we will allow you to unmute for specific questions.
Okay.
Kelly,
Thanks, Crystal. So the first question we have here is about the application documents. In the photo doc, the project photos document, there's only space for 5 photos. Are they allowed to include more than 5, or is 5 the limit?
We would prefer that you keep it to 5 because ultimately these application packages are going to be a lot of pages. We didn't set a page limit, but we do want you to try to be succinct. So 5 would be preferred if possible.
All right, and then the next question. So if multiple parcels are included in their application and proposal, and then the review committee determines that only one parcel is eligible or desired, can that project still move forward, or would we disqualify the whole proposal?
That's an interesting question. It is ideal that you submit what you think you can accomplish within 3 years, and I would ask them to look in the NPS manual or reach out to me a little bit more about that, because that is an unusual situation. It is possible once project authorization begins to make modifications, but it is the NPS authority. So between the time of applying and authorization, it will be difficult to have time to work on modifying that package to the NPS. So the application package is going to be put into grants.gov, and we need to be able to make that transfer pretty quickly. So please do reach out, whoever wrote that question, to us, and I'll talk to you more specifically.
Okay, and then maybe if you could talk a little bit about the grants.gov submission process. The question was whether the locality submits that or DCR submits it into grants.gov.
That is all submitted by DCR. So that is why DCR in Virginia is the grantee. We have the authority on your behalf to submit the project to NPS and do all of that coordination. So once you give us the application, we will go through that, contact you with any questions or clarifications needed prior to the grants.gov submission. But yes, that's the responsibility of DCR.
All right, and the next question is, so if a parcel, the land, they won't actually acquire it until after the grant was approved, but can they purchase an option to purchase ahead of time?
I have seen that happen to keep the willing, to be sure that the willing seller devotes, that property to the project. But typically that part of the financial transaction would not be eligible, just the cost of the actual acquisition itself. So it is allowed to do that, but it likely would not be eligible for reimbursement.
All right, and then a question on the 6F protection. If the property is already owned by the Commonwealth, such as a state forest, is the revised deed still needed?
Yes, if it is not protected with LWCF 6F language, you would need to amend that deed to include that upon prior to project closeout. And the entire park would need to be protected as well.
And then here's the question that you may or may not be able to answer, and whether we have any insights in whether the new governor is interested in adding additional state parks to DCR's holdings.
I'm not able to answer that at this time. So keep your eyes out. I'm not sure. Yeah, not my purview per se.
All right, so if an application is submitted for this grant round and it's determined to be deficient, can the same application be resubmitted during our next grant round for reconsideration? And their statement is, in other words, does the project just have one chance to be considered?
No, projects can be submitted again in future grant rounds. Yeah, that would be fine.
All right, that's all the questions that are in right now.
All right. Would anybody like to unmute and ask a question? Well, hearing none.
Yeah, hi Crystal, hi Kelly. This is Tim Padalino with Albemarle County. Our Parks and Recreation team and grants team have been tracking along, and this has been really informative and helpful. So we appreciate this info. You've actually answered many of our questions, but we're considering developing an application for a property that's somewhat unique, and so we might need to follow up offline. But I had a couple questions. One is kind of about the background and the context of this LWCF program in recent cycles, and another is a bit more technical on the Conserve Virginia map. But in terms of like the LWCF program, we are requesting pretty major CIP funding for Biscuit Run Park, which we've been in a lease with DCR since 2018, and we're going into year 4, and we are still trying to establish public access to and public use of this 1,200-acre property. So we just wanted to know if you have any examples of recent projects or projects from recent LWCF cycles that have received the Max Award, because we're trying to feel out, you know, what, how to structure our request and our proposal.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my first question.
Okay, so specifically you're asking, have we reached the $2 million on projects before?
Yeah, have any recent cycles?
Yes, our prior cycle was for acquisition, and we did have applications up to $2 million received. And because of the balance of how many applications and the available funding, yes, that did go forward. So ultimately the answer will be determined by the committee and the application load and everything like that. But yes, it is feasible. $11.64 million is a lot, and we don't want to, you know, lapse any of it. So I do recommend that people ask for what they need. We want the project to be successful, and with current times, things are pretty expensive. I'd be interested to know a little bit more details about that partnership, but generally speaking, yes, we could quite likely include funding up to $2 million per project.
Yeah, that's really helpful context. Our CIP requests are not finalized or funded, but the overall scope that we're looking at locally, even the maxed award to this program wouldn't come close to 50% of project costs, just for this phase that we're trying to move forward.
Right, and I think I hit on this a little bit, but you can just select a small portion of your project. You know, if you're under this large, big scale project, you can focus on just a portion of it for LWCF, and you can overmatch something, but LWCF will only provide up to 50%. You can be spending more money, but you know that's part of the balance, is to see all that in the budget and really kind of walk through that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. And then we were looking at the scoring criteria, and we recognize the importance of the Conserve Virginia 3.0 data on your conservation mapper program. Well, we just had some concerns, or I guess some questions, because the Conserve Virginia data layers seem to show some of the category layers kind of coming right up to Biscuit Run Park, but then not including any of those resources or those data layers in the park, when we know that there are some significant natural heritage resources that are even identified in the deed and the MOA and through field work with our Natural Heritage Committee and Natural Resources Manager. So is that the kind of information that we can provide as a supplement in those optional documents and still potentially receive, you know, appropriate scoring or criteria evaluation?
Yes, that does happen a lot, specifically with like the recreation access model and Conserve Virginia, that it may or may not fall within there. It'll be verified by DCR staff within the scoring criteria. We broke it out a little bit more. Instead of just 50% or 100% of it covered by Conserve Virginia, we broke it down a little bit more, like 75%, et cetera. So obviously not all projects will be within that layer. You can provide some information about, you know, why it is important. Question 26 on the DCR application. You can enter some text there for any additional like attached documents. Please just attach like the page that is necessary and then the website if we do need to access more of it. You don't need to include the entire plan for any of these questions. We do prefer just a succinct one-page attachment if possible. So yes, we do recognize, you know, that within the scoring criteria, some things will inherently be zero if they're based on database, but the committee will consider additional information and verification if you have it available.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. And we'll be selective when we try to demonstrate some of these details. But yeah, we will reach out to you because I think there's going to be other project or property specific questions that we have. And then also just any guidance on the mechanics of whittling down a whole universe of information to a manageable application. So I'll just say thanks in advance. And thanks again for today's webinar. This is extremely informative.
Well, thank you. And I really do thank everybody that has attended. I'm really actually grateful to see so many people registered and attending this webinar. Would anybody else like to unmute and ask questions?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, hey, so this is Catherine Vanoy. I second Tim's assessment of the meeting. Was very well done. Thank you, guys. Materials are really clear. I do have one question about reference to low income. It's in the scoring criteria worksheet under item 3F. So can you guys identify how you are defining low income? Is there a particular MHI number that we're supposed to be looking at, or how are we working with that?
Right. Within the DCR LWCF application manual, I would recommend that you go to the application guidance appendix because we do talk about the different websites that you can go to for that, you know, statewide websites. And then if you have local data that also, you know, somehow verifies all of that, that could be an option as well. So it's kind of like you can have either or option.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.